Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So
Amen.
here we see next week's Sedra Shlach, and that's because we are at the end. Here's the end, right? The end of BeHa'alot'cha, which is the passage that we've been studying this week, and we are very close to the conclusion of BeHa'alot'cha. So, in a way, we have a Shechianu moment that we have completed all the Rashis on a particular Sedra. So let's do it. And I just have this little bit here. So let's take a look here. Okay, make sure we are in the right place. Vatisager Miriam michutz lamachane. Miriam was basically tisager is to close. In other words, she was put in seclusion, right, closed outside the camp. This is remember how one was treated if one was in a leper state. You had to be separated away from the camp and be outside. The truth is, I know we hear about leper colonies, but the way I understand it from reading the Torah, etc., is these were not colonies. That one actually, of course, you had to have food, you had to have shelter, etc., but essentially you went into isolation. And I think that's because in isolation, sometimes you can do some deep thinking. And I think in this particular case, that when you had to deal with
Yeah.
leprosy, you had to think very, very carefully about your behavior and say, what is this telling me? What do I need to change? What in my behavior is unacceptable? So, at any rate, so Miriam was given that opportunity here. But we're going to see something interesting. So, she was placed outside 7 days. So that's how long it took for her leprosy to clear up. And we were told before that it was going to be 7 days. Va'am lo nasa. But you see here that she was given honor, despite the fact that she was having to endure a punishment, you might say. Nevertheless, the entire people honored her. It says the nation did not journey. They stayed in their place. They waited ad Hasef Miriam until Miriam was brought back into the camp. So there's something kind of poignant about the fact that despite the fact that we're talking about an issue where there was inappropriate behavior and there was the consequences of it, nevertheless, there also along with it went a deep respect for the individual who was suffering for it. Because on every other level, Miriam was a great woman. And they did not, just because she had to go through and endure what she was doing, they didn't ignore her. So, Rashi, Ha'am lo nasa, I believe, yes, the people did not journey. This is from Tractate Sota, page 9. Zeh hakavod chalakla. This honor they awarded her, they gave her, hamakom, that is to say, God. Remember, back up, it wasn't up to the people as to when they journeyed, right? They were following the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. And we read elsewhere that when those moved, that's when the people journeyed. So clearly, the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire remained in place, and so we can say the fact that it remained in place, that God was honoring Miriam. Right? So that is something very important to understand. That the punishment that she was going through and enduring didn't mean that God had rejected her. Okay, so why did God give her this honor? Bishvil, on account of sha'a achat, that one moment, that 1 hour, shenit akva Moshe, that when she waited for Moses, right, she herself waited for Moses, keshehu layaor, when he was cast into the Nile. So again, I think the principle here is to realize that while we sometimes feel that no good deed goes unpunished, that nevertheless, on a more serious level, that everything is noted and that every small good thing that we do is noted, and that there is ultimately a reward for those kinds of things. And again, if I'm correct in saying that religion is all about significance and the discovery of significance within our own lives, again, it's saying that everything we do has significance, every single thing. And we should not think, again, even though there are things in this world that seem unaccountable, nevertheless, they will be accounted within the grand scheme of things and in the eyes of God. Okay, so, Shinema, as it says in Exodus chapter 2, V'te'atz, I think it is, V'titatz, let's look at this. I'm going to make this a little bit larger and see. Okay. Okay, so maybe it's V'hitatzev achoto merachok. So it says, in other words, his sister, achoto, his sister, waited, right? Something like that, or she placed herself. I'm trying to think of what this could mean, right? From a distance, etc. In other words, we know that when Moses was put in the little ark and placed the box and placed into the Nile, that Miriam stood afar and watched what was going on, because obviously they didn't want anything terrible to happen to him. And that's when, of course, the princess Egypt saw him there, etc., etc. So for that, right? She herself was paid with honor for that. So okay, after that, va'achar, and after that, nasu ha'am mechatzerot, the people journeyed from Chatzerot, v'yachanu b'midbar Paran, and they encamped in the wilderness of Paran. And that is the end of our Parsha for that. So I'm going to just stop the share for a second. And if any of you have any comments or thoughts about this Parsha, either what we just read today or in general about the Parsha, I'd be very happy to hear your questions and see if we can discuss them and clarify them. David.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, it's in terms of they're not leaving, that, the Israelites not leaving because of the fact that they were honoring Miriam. Is it because, I mean, is it because they really were honoring her, or because the fact that the cloud, and the fire weren't leaving yet, and basically they were going to stay put, and I'm sure, it sounds more like God was honoring her and therefore they fell behind. So, maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, but I'm just curious.
No,
So,
I think you're right. I actually think you're right. I think essentially, and that's the point, that this is what makes Rashi so important, right? Look at how I interpreted it to begin with, and how after reading Rashi, I had to revise my opinion as to who was really honoring Miriam. And of course, Rashi understood in his great knowledge, what it really meant. To answer your question, look. Anytime we obey the divine command, are we honoring God? Yes. So
yeah,
I would say that in honoring God, to try and maybe give a better answer to this, that in honoring God, they were ultimately honoring Miriam, and that by God not moving onwards, he was getting the rest of the people to also honor her. And I could go a step further and say that the people might ask themselves, why? In other words, if you asked yourself, well, why are we staying here? Why are we getting delayed? And to realize that it was to honor Miriam. So there'd be a lesson there for them too. So I'm really happy you asked the question, because you've allowed me then to think further as to what some of the dynamics were in this.
great. Thank you.
You bet. Mr. Sklar, you look like you did have a point or a question to make.
Yeah, I do, but I'm not sure if I'm going to explain it right in my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any consciousness to our neshama? Are we aware? I mean, is there? I know we think and we react, but as far as the neshama itself, Is that a conscious, is there something conscious about it?
Well, I may not be understanding your question well enough, but it seems to me that in some ways our neshama is exactly our consciousness. So we have some different words to describe, the soul. There's the word nefesh. I think the word nefesh describes the fact that we move around, that we're capable of motion and walking and that kind of element of us, right? Because they talk about nefesh meat, and we the animal soul, and I believe, and I could be wrong. I'm just telling you my understanding as of this time, is that that's something we share with all creatures. All creatures. Every creature has it. And I'd have to say, even insects, right? Anything that's animated. In other words, I think of nefesh as being our ability to be animated. On the other hand, neshama is something else, right? Because it seems to me that animals, for the most part, I can't say for all, right? But I think for the most part, animals don't necessarily operate on a rational level. They operate by instinct. In other words, they're programmed to a certain extent to act in a certain way. And we ourselves, too, are programmed to a very great extent. And when we allow our instincts, right, to dominate our lives, then we actually destroy ourselves, right? That when people follow their, the impulses, that's a dangerous place to be. Now, it's not to say that impulses are bad. The truth is, if we didn't have those impulses, we couldn't exist. But the real question is, how do we live with those impulses and rein them in and work with our rational ability to think carefully of when those impulses are being used to maintain life, to sustain life, to enhance life, and when are we using them to destroy others, to destroy ourselves, etc. I mean, for example, we can get angry. To get angry, anger is an impulse. Well, for the most part, I love the statement that says the problem with anger is it's just one letter short from danger. And the truth is, by and large, getting angry is a dangerous impulse because then we don't think and we see how people behave when they get angry. So, one of the things we need to learn is how to master our own anger and to admit when we are being angry. I mean, sometimes we don't admit when we're actually angry. And there are other impulses as well. Okay. Animals also have impulses. So for us as human beings, the secret is to rein them in. I like to sometimes see the metaphor of dancing with them because they are an important part of who we are. But the truth is, the degree to which we're able to control our impulses and use them in a way that, for me at this point, even though I wish I did a better job of it, is to serve my creator. I mean, to me, that is the ultimate purpose of life, is to take the unique qualities we have, the unique abilities that we have, and somehow use them having, when it says you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, not to, you know, give those words little, to see them, oh, it's a nice thought. I think that's a danger. I think the idea is, and I really see it in the rabbinic opus, in what the rabbis try to do, in pulling apart as much as they do the specific commandments. But the idea is to try and do it as perfectly as you can, but to really live your life, loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And and I want to say this because it may be gratuitous on my part, but I feel that there are many religions, right, which also have that in mind. And because, the beauty of humanity is its complexity and the differences and the different cultures, etc., to my mind, that is actually a sign of God's greatness. It's an indication of the greatness of God. I just happen to have got the invitation to be Jewish, and I love it. I really think it's a brilliant religion. And I think that pretty much every religion has these elements of controlling your impulses, right? That's important element of all these religions. I think I mentioned the word Islam means submission, right? They try to, be able to submit all their abilities before God. Well, likewise, in Judaism, we do it in a little bit of a different way. It's very similar in some ways. I mean, I look at Buddhism, and I've learned such amazing lessons, you know, from Buddhism about being mindful. I think that's such a great expression to act in a mindful way, as opposed to just being driven by impulses. And you can see very clearly what happens when people allow the impulses to totally control their behavior. David, I may not have answered your question.
We'll talk about it again. I'm going to have to leave. I'm sorry.
It's
I've
okay.
got a walking group that we have to solve the world's problems. So
Well, hopefully
I'll see you.
I hope I've given you some juice.
All right. Baruch Hashem. Yes.
Okay.
I'll see you on Monday.
Take
Baruch
care.
Me too.
Yes. Okay.
Sunday?
Yes, Sunday.
or Sunday.
Thank-
Yes. Yes. I believe I will. If we don't meet on Sunday, I will let you know. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, you bet. All right. Any other, I'll tell you, I think we can take this off at this point in a moment, unless anybody has another question, then I'll stop the recording and then, okay.